Hello there and welcome back to Marcelian Online. The 11.2 tier sets have just been announced and they are spicy because this is a whole new take on tier set bonuses and we're going to be looking at all of them today in succinct, quick fashion so that we can actually cover them all today and get back to actually playing some WoW. A quick big disclaimer as we start. The tier sets this season, unless they change their mind, will be revolving around hero talents and not necessarily particular talents in question. So as we're going through these tier set bonuses, I will be talking about them related to their hero talents and not necessarily the spec that they apply to. It's gonna be interesting, so let's start it off really quick with the Deathbringer 2 set piece for Death Knight, of course, Blood and Frost. Keep in mind that the wording and the numbers of these will probably change, and so far the data mine is very incomplete, but what we're looking at, the 2 set piece is casting Reaper's Mark grants stacks of Exterminate with increased effectiveness on the first and second scythe in terms of damage. These numbers will always be tuned by the end, so don't worry too much about the respective numbers. Now, Reaper's Mark can stack up to 15 additional times and increases your critical strike chance by 10% after it explodes for 8 seconds, this being the 4-piece Deathbringer set for both Blood and Frost, and I expect these will essentially be changed and buffed and nerfed for their specs respectively. The Rider of the Apocalypse tier set, the 2-piece, reads as follows. Apocalypse now summons Whitemane for 10 seconds. Whitemane's Undeath deals 10% increased damage and infects one additional target when it spreads, and her Death Coil deals 35% increased damage. While for Frost, Pillar of Frost now summons Trollbane for 10 seconds. Trollbane's Icy Fury deals 10% increased damage and his Obliterate deals 35% increased damage. Note that these come as package deal with the reworked version of Frost and Unholy that we will have a video on soon. The Rider of the Apocalypse 4 set bonus is casting Death Coil or Epidemic orders Whitemane to cast her Death Coil or Epidemic alongside you at 125% effectiveness. Your Death Coil deals 40% increased damage to targets affected by Whitemane's Undeath. While for Frost, casting Obliterate or Frost Scythe orders Trollbane to cast his Obliterate or Frost Scythe alongside you at 100% effectiveness. Your Obliterate deals 20% increased damage to targets affected by Trollbane's Icy Fury. Once again, quick reminder, Frost Scythe is gonna get changed and it's looking spicy and you might actually have to use it. So, that's pretty cool. Sandlane tier set, the 2-piece, applies for both Blood and Unholy. Infliction of Sorrow extends the duration of your diseases by an additional 3 seconds on your main target, and Essence of the Blood Queen additionally increases your mastery by 0.8% per stack. Since mastery scaling is different for each particular spec, I assume that this number is also kind of like placeholder, but what you can understand is that you'll just get more mastery as this stacks. The 4-piece Sandlane sets is going to make Blood Beast last for an additional 4 seconds, and Vampiric Strike increases the melee attack power of your Dancing Rune weapon by 10% for 6 seconds. Multiple applications may overlap. This is for Blood. While for Unholy, Blood Beast lasts for an additional 4 seconds still, and Vampiric Strike increases the melee attack power of your Ghoul by 10% for 6 seconds. Of course, multiple applications may overlap. We're going to be moving on to Demon Hunter with the Eldrachi Reaver 2 set piece. Reaver's Glaive damage is increased by 60% and other physical only damage is increased by 30%. The 4 set piece makes Fury of the Eldrachi further empowers Blade Dance when cast after Chaos Strike, increasing slashes to 12. Reaver's Mark now stacks up to 2 times and further empowers Chaos Strike when cast after Blade Dance, applying an additional stack for 100% of normal duration, and this was for Havoc. Vengeance. Fury of the Eldrachi further empowers Soul Cleave when cast after Shear, increasing slashes to 12. Reaver's Mark now stacks up to 2 times and further empowers Shear when cast after Soul Cleave, applying an additional stack for 100% normal duration. Essentially what this does is it just makes your dancing abilities combo stronger. Not particularly amazing, but it is fun. It is the core Eldrachi playstyle. Fellscard, the 2 set piece for Havoc, makes Immolation Aura deal 30% increased damage and increases Chaos Strike damage by 30% while active. While for Vengeance, Immolation Aura still increased by 30% damage and increases Soul Cleave damage by 30% while active. This is interesting because Soul Cleave also kind of hits AoE, while Chaos Strike also kind of only hits single target. I don't know if that's going to be a big contender for the tuning of this particular one, but maybe it's not that big of a deal. The 4-set piece for Felskar for Havoc, entering Demon form now immediately induces a Demon Surge and shatters a Demon Soul Fragment that grants 20% increased damage for 10 seconds. While for Vengeance, entering Demon form now immediately induces a Demon Surge and shatters a Demon Soul Fragment that grants 20% increased damage for 15 seconds. You're going to be shattering Demon Soul Fragments, meaning you're not going to be consuming them to heal, particularly for Vengeance. So I don't think that's going to be too bad of an effect, and if anything, at the very least, if this becomes a problem, they can just make it heal, but I don't think one Demon Soul Fragment is going to be that big of a deal. Moving on to Druid. Druid of the Claw, the 2-set piece, makes Ravage increase your haste by 10% and chance to critically strike by 10%, and the damage your bleeds deal by 30% for 5 seconds. Wow. This seems incredibly strong for Feral. We'll see how this plays out. The 4-set piece for Feral makes Ravage have a 40% chance to make you ravage your target again 4 seconds later at 100% of the initial power. Until we actually get to test this, this is not very clear if it eats up combo points or is casted at full combo points. If it's casted in the middle of you doing something else 4 seconds later. It's interesting why they chose this 4-second window. Maybe because you can buff it with something. We're gonna be having to test this on the PTR once it becomes available. For Bear, Ravage has a 40% chance to make you ravage your target again 4 seconds later at 60% effectiveness, so a little bit less damage here, probably afraid of making tanks too strong. The Elun's Chosen 2-set piece for Balance makes Starfire damage increase by 25%. Gaining Astral Power with Starfire has a 50% chance to launch a Star Surge at a victim at 50% effectiveness. While for Bear, Thrash damage increased by 20%. Thrash has a 40% chance to launch a Star Surge still at a victim at 65% effectiveness. So a little bit more damage here. Maybe to keep them in tune with their respective other hero talents that were supposed to be better at single target than Elun's Chosen, because this is a single target bonus on top of the AoE buff to Starfire and Thrash respectively. Interesting. The 4-set piece for Elun's Chosen makes Fit for Balance on impact. Star Surges launched by Starfire split to up to 3 additional targets at 80% effectiveness and grant a stack of Gathering Moonlight. Casting Fury of Elun or Full Moon consumes the Gathering Moonlight to increase your damage by 4% per stack for 12 seconds. This is a very interesting tier set bonus because you will be hitting 4 targets instead of the usual 5 that's normally the small amount of cleave, but also you might hold off on using Fury of Elun and Full Moon respectively to gain as many of the Gathering Moonlight stacks as possible for that 12-second window, something that Balance doesn't usually do. You just like fire stuff when it becomes available. While for Bear, on impact, Star Surges launched by Thrash split up to 3 additional targets at 20% effectiveness and grant a stack of Gathering Moonlight. Casting Lunar Beam consumes Gathering Moonlight to increase your damage by 4% per stack for 12 seconds. It doesn't really say how many times this ends up stacking, and considering that Bear doesn't really get that many, I guess it gets Lunar Beam cooldown reduction through Elun's Chosen, so that's not really true. This seems really cool, really fun. I'm curious to see how this plays. Keeper of the Grove, the 2-set piece for Balance, makes casting Celestial Alignment calls down upon the assistance of a Dryad for 10 seconds that casts Star Surge at 70% effectiveness and Starfall at 100% effectiveness. We can just assume this is just raw damage because it's passive. They're probably going to tune how many the Dryad casts and how hard they hit throughout the PTR. For Resto, casting Incarnation Tree of Life or Convoke the Spirits, for both of them, calls upon the assistance of a Dryad for 5 seconds only that casts Tranquility at 50% effectiveness and instantly regrowths your lowest health ally at 200% effectiveness. This is a really cool effect when you just press it and instantly somebody gets really healed for 200% effectiveness of a regrowth. Assuming this benefits from the mastery scaling on top of, I don't know if it consumes Soul of the Forest. This would be interesting. And also, a side note, Tranquility is going to be reworked. Well, not reworked, but buffed at smaller targets. So this could be really cool in Mythic Plus. The Keeper of the Grove 4-set piece for Balance makes when your Dryad fades, your next 2 Star Surges damage for an additional amount equal to 5% of your damage done while it was active, and splash 20% of the damage onto nearby enemies reduced beyond 5 targets. That's really cool. That gives Keeper of the Grove some AoE potential. While for Resto, when your Dryad fades, your next 2 Swift Mends heal for an additional amount equal to 5% of your healing done while it was active, and splash 25% of their healing onto nearby allies, reduced beyond 5 targets. These are some really cool effects, I have to say. Wild Stalker, the 2-set piece for Feral, makes the rate at which Bloodseeker vines grow increase by 40%. Tiger's Fury causes Bloodseeker vines to grow up to 3 valid nearby enemies. Okay, this is just more passive dot damage. While for Resto, the rate at which Symbiotic Blooms grow is increased by 40%, and casting Regrowth with Clear Casting causes Symbiotic Blooms to grow on up to 2 valid nearby allies. I would assume allies that probably don't have it already. And the 4-piece for Feral makes Bloodseeker Vines have a 20% chance to trigger Bursting Growth every 2 seconds at 100% effectiveness. Each stack of Bloodseeker Vines on an enemy increases Bursting Growth damage taken by 30%. Okay, more passive dot damage, I guess that's great. Not as exciting as the other ones. While for Resto, Symbiotic Blooms have a 20% chance to trigger Bursting Growth every 2 seconds at 100% effectiveness. Each stack of Symbiotic Blooms on an ally increases Bursting Growth healing taken by 30%. This kind of needs to be put to test, of course, because this is very unreliable whenever something related to your survivability, whether it's healing or damage reduction, comes at a percent chance to proc. It can be either really good or really useless, with sometimes overlap in between, because if the target is fully maxed out on HP, maybe this doesn't work, or maybe I don't understand how Wild Stalker works. Moving on to Evoker. Also, side note, a bunch of these have been reworked outside of the tier set, so the specs and hero towns have been changed slightly. The Chrono Warden tier set piece makes tip of the scales cooldown be reduced by 60 seconds. Simple, weirdly simple, very weirdly simple. The 4-set piece, Temporal Burst, causes Chrono Flames to strike 1 additional target and repeat 10% additional damage or healing up to a minimum of its skills with spell power. We'll know exactly what the number is. Flame Shaper 2-set piece, Engulf, stokes your inner flame, increasing your damage and healing over time by 40% and increasing your chance to gain Essence Burst by 50% for 12 seconds. Stacks up to 2 times. Multiple applications may overlap. This is very strong, considering that also Engulf has, I believe, been buffed in 11.2. The 4-set piece, now we have some different effects based off the spec. Devastation makes consuming Essence Burst during Inner Flame, fires an Essence Bomb at your target, damaging nearby enemies for 400% of your spell power, reduced beyond 5 targets. The Preservation version makes consuming Essence Burst during Inner Flame, fire an Essence Bomb at your target, healing nearby allies for 500% spell power reduced beyond 5 targets. Now this is at your target, assuming the ally, assuming once again they kind of have to be stacked. This has been an ongoing issue with Evoker in general, but Preservation in particular, when you have to heal and everything that you have to do, means people have to be kind of close together. Might be worth it in certain situations, but maybe this is not going to be that big of a deal. Scale Commander 2-set piece. While flying during Breath of Eons or Deep Breath, and for 10 seconds after, you command a squadron of 2 Drakthir who will attack your targets with Disintegrate and Pyre. This sounds awfully similar to the Druid one with the Dryad spawns, assuming these will just visually spawns that are just passive damage with no actual control that you have over them. The 4-set piece makes Devastation have, while your squadron is active, your Mass Disintegrate strikes up to 2 additional targets, so a total of 5. In addition, your squadron assists you for 5 additional seconds. And for Augmentation, when your squad is active, your Mass Eruption strikes up to 2 additional targets. In addition, your squadron assists you for 5 additional seconds. So similar effects, they just apply to their respective spells. Hunter. Also, Hunter has been slightly reworked, but we'll get to that in the future. The Dark Ranger 2-set piece makes Beast Mastery Black Arrow damage increase by 10% and Bleak Potter damage increase by 20%. Firing a Black Arrow reduces the cooldown of Call of the Wild by 2 seconds. While for Marksmanship, Black Arrow damage increased also by 10% and Bleak Potter damage also increased by 20%. Firing a Black Arrow reduces the cooldown of True Shot by 1 second. They're going to have faster cooldowns. Really interesting, specifically for Marksmanship, because it gets another cooldown reduction on True Shot. The 4 set piece makes Withering Fire's Black Arrow damage increase by 25%, and Consuming Death Blow has 50% chance to cause all Black Arrow barrages during your next Withering Fire to fire 1 additional Black Arrow. The Pack Leader 2 set piece makes Pet damage increase by 15% for survival and Beast damage increase by 15%. Summoning a Beast grants 8% haste, mastery, or critical strike chance based on the beast summon. I'm assuming these buffs are associated with each individual beast from the Leok, Huffer, and Misha. I played Hearthstone, okay? Beast Mastery. Pet damage increased by 5%. Beast damage increased by 15%. Summoning a Beast grants 8% haste, mastery, or critical strike, similar to how Survival has gotten its bonus. Now, the 4 set piece is the same for both. Summoning a Beast has a 25% chance to rouse the nearby wildlife into a stampede, charging your target and dealing a lot of physical damage to your enemies over 7 seconds. Your chance to summon a stampede is increased to 100% while you have lead from the front. This is probably Stampede coming back, and if this is actually cool and we're lucky, we might have this as a baseline talent going into Midnight. The Sentinel 2 set piece for marksmanship makes when Lunar Storm fades, gain the Boon of a Loon, causing your next 2 aim shots to deal arcane damage and have their damage increase by 20%. This is a very big change because converting physical damage to magic damage is almost always a net big buff because you won't have the armor of your enemies reduce the general damage. So not only does it do more damage, but it never gets reduced by armor anymore. For survival, makes it so that when your Lunar Storm fades, gain the Boon of a Loon, causing your next 2 Wildfire Bombs to deal arcane damage and have their damage increased by 60%, probably because they were already doing fire damage and not physical damage, so maybe that extra bonus was to compensate for it. Probably also Wildfire Bomb damage does less damage than aim shots anyway. And the 4-piece Sentinel bonus makes Sentinel's damage increase by 25%. Abilities that consume the Boon of a Loon are guaranteed to apply 2 stacks of Sentinel. A little bit more boring than the 2 set piece, which is very surprising, but hey, damage. Mage. Frostfire. The 2 set piece for fire makes Comet Storm, Ice Nova, and Frostfire Burst deal 10% increased damage and now apply Ignite at 150% effectiveness. While for Frost, Meteor, Frostfire Burst, and Frostfire Bolt deal 10% increased damage and also apply Ignite, dealing an additional 30% damage over 9 seconds, so not the regular fire Ignite. The 4 set piece makes it so that casting Glacial Spike for Frost has a 100% chance to also cast a Pyroblast at 100% effectiveness. Additionally, Pyroblast now benefits from Ignite, and this is for Frost Mage. While for Fire, are you keeping up? Casting Pyroblast has a 20% chance to also cast a Glacial Spike at 100% effectiveness that doesn't root. Additionally, Glacial Spike now benefits from Ignite. I don't know why Glacial Spike would root. Maybe I'm missing a thing here, or maybe some rework has happened that, unbeknownst to me, makes Glacial Spike root. And yay, Glacial Spike benefits from Ignite? Whoa, that's pretty cool. Spellslinger 2 set piece for Arcane makes Arcane Blast damage increase by 20%. Direct Splinter damage has a 50% chance to grant a stack of Arcane Harmony. Very interesting. While for Frost, Ice Lance and Icicle damage is increased by 20%. Direct Splinter damage has a 25% chance to grant a stack of Cold Front. The Spellslinger 4 set piece for Arcane makes Arcane Orb have a 100% chance to grant a stack of Arcane Harmony up to 5 times, I assume based on targets hit, so you can get 5 stacks of Arcane Harmony. Upon reaching maximum stacks of Arcane Harmony, you gain Intuition. This is a very interesting change because that means, bro, we might need to make a video on this. You will likely gain Intuition by the time you gain max Harmony stacks unless you're in AoE, which you might consume the Arcane Harmony before it actually gains the max stack and giving you Intuition. But if anything, gaining max stacks of Arcane Harmony makes it so that you can freely cast Arcane Barrage without having to worry about consuming Arcane Charges. But at the same time, there's always a chance that you over-generate Arcane Harmony depending on how you generate those stacks, if it's like with high voltage Arcane Missiles. So this will need a lot of testing. While for Frost, when Frozen Orb deals damage to 1 or more enemies, it has a 15% chance to grant a stack of Cold Front. When Cold Front summons a Frozen Orb, increases your spell damage by 10%. These are vastly different effects. I'm curious to see how they will be balanced. Sun Fury, the 2 set piece. Spellfire Sphere spell damage bonus increased by, I guess 1%. Your Arcane Phoenix has 25% chance to cast an exceptional spell without consuming a Spellfire Spear. This is interesting depending on how they code it, because you can just have really lucky Arcane Phoenix's shots of just casting exceptional spells, making this very RNG, but also really cool if it ends up proccing a lot of times. The Force Set piece makes it so that when your Phoenix expires, it empowers you even further beyond. A little bit of a Dragon Ball Z ode here, granting lesser time warp, increasing spell damage for 10 seconds. So not actual haste, but 10% spell damage. Really cool. Monk. Conduit of the Celestial 2-set piece makes Windwalker Heart of the Jade Serpent additionally trigger for 8 seconds at 100% effectiveness after you cast Slicing Winds, further locking in Slicing Winds into your build. This is the first and probably only, I believe, tier set bonus that locks you into a particular talent. While for Mistweaver, Heart of the Jade Serpent additionally triggers for 8 seconds at 100% effectiveness after you cast Thunder Focus Tea, which you're always going to use as Mistweaver, so that's not a problem. You're just going to get more Heart of the Jade Serpent, which is actually the cool part of this particular hero talent that makes the rotation interesting and fun. So I don't mind it that much. The 4-set piece makes Heart of the Jade Serpent increase your haste by 15% while active and for 4 seconds afterwards, giving you some management over its window to extend it for that 15% haste as much as possible. Master of Harmony 2-set piece for Mistweaver. Gaining Vitality has an increased chance to cause your next Tiger Palm to unleash a Harmonic Surge, dealing a lot of nature damage split between your target and other enemies, and healing up to 5 injured allies for quite a lot of spell power scaling. While the Brewmaster version makes gaining Vitality has an increased chance to cause your next Tiger Palm to unleash a Harmonic Surge, dealing also a lot of damage split between your target and your other enemies, and healing for significantly less healing towards your 5 nearby allies. So just Tiger Palm unleashes some procs that deal damage and healing, and these will be tuned to make sure that they're not bonkers. The 4-set piece makes it so that casting Thunder Focus Tea guarantees that your next 2 casts of Tiger Palm will trigger a Harmonic Surge, while for Brewmaster we currently have an incomplete tooltip that I assume applies to maybe Celestial Brew, and casting it guarantees that your next 2 casts of Tiger Palm will trigger a Harmonic Surge. Shadow Panda 2-set bonus for Windwalker makes Flurry Strikes deal 30% more damage, and activating Storm, Earth, and Fire instantly grants 10 stacks of Flurry Strikes that trigger on your next attack at 100% effectiveness. Brewmaster, Flurry Strikes deal 30% more damage, and activating Weapons of Order instantly grants 10 stacks of Flurry Strikes that trigger on your next attack at 100% effectiveness. The 4-set piece for Windwalker, Flurry Charge generation is increased by 100%, and Flurry Strikes trigger every 120 energy spent during Storm, Earth, and Fire, while for Brewmaster, Flurry Charge generation is increased still by 100%, and Flurry Strikes trigger every 120 energy still spent during Weapons of Order, further empowering these respective cooldowns, which is great because they could use a little bit of oomph. Paladin. Herald of the Sun 2-set piece for Holy makes Downlight's healing and damage increased by 30%, and you gain Solar Wrath after Avenging Wrath fades, causing Sun's Avatar's effect to linger for an additional 10 seconds. For Retribution, Downlight's healing and damage is increased by 30%, and you gain Solar Wrath after Avenging Wrath fades, causing Sun's Avatar's effect to linger also for an additional 10 seconds. So kind of like a similar effect. The 4-set piece for Holy makes Solar Wrath increase the effectiveness of your Holy Power Spenders by 15% and grant you 2 Downlights. And for Red, it has the exact same effect. Lightsmith 2-set piece for Protection. Hammer and Anvil damage is increased by 15%, and it can also be activated at 100% effectiveness, and it also has the exact same effect for Holy. The 4-set piece for Lightsmith, Hammer and Anvil also grants a stack of Masterwork, causing your next Holy Armament to cast one lesser version of itself on a nearby ally for each stack. This is the same effect for both specs. Yay. Templar 2-set piece. Your Empyrean Hammer deals 20% increased critical strike damage, and its critical strikes have a 50% chance to grant an additional stack of Light's Deliverance. The 4-set piece makes Hammer of Light deal 35% increased damage to its primary target, strikes 3 additional secondary targets, and can now be cast 1 more time after Eye of Tyr for protection, of course. Hammer of Light deals 35% increased damage for red to its primary target, strikes 3 additional targets, and can now be cast 1 more time after Wake of Ashes. And we're going into Priest, a class that's kind of been reworked, particularly Shadow, but Discipline and Holy have been addressed as well. More of that into the future. The Archon 2-set piece makes Shadow Halos generate an additional 10 Insanity over 5 seconds, and Resonant Energy additionally increase the damage of your Devouring Plague by 5%. For Holy, Halos reduce the cooldown of your Holy War Serenity and Holy War Sanctify by 5 seconds, and Resonant Energy additionally increases the healing of your Holy Wards by 5%. The 4-set piece for Archon for Shadow makes it so that while Power Surge is active, every 2 casts of Devouring Plague adds another Halo to the effect at 100% effectiveness up to 2 times. I'm assuming this just casts random Halos. We'll need to test. While for Holy, while Power Surge is active, every 2 casts of Holy Word Serenity or Holy Word Sanctify adds another Halo to the effect at 100% effectiveness up to 2 times. The Oracle 2-set piece makes casting Prayer of Mending heal your target for a lot of spell power. For Discipline, the first bolts of each penance cast damages or heals for 200% more. A big impact oomph effect. Really nice. The 4-set piece, casting Premonition of Piety or Premonition of Solace, grants 2 stacks of Premonition of Insight at 100% effectiveness. Consuming a stack of Premonition of Insight increases your haste by 1% for 10 seconds. Multiple applications may overlap. Void Weaver tier set. The 2-set piece for Discipline makes Void Blast and Penance damage increase by 40%, and Void Blast's cast time is reduced by 20%. While for Shadow, Void Blast damage is increased by 40%, and Void Blast cast time is reduced by 20% still, and Void Blast cooldown is also reduced by 50%. The 4-set piece for Discipline makes your Void Blast now also cause Entropic Rift to grow. Collapsing Void increases Entropic Rift's damage by an additional 10%, and the damage of your next Mind Blast is increased by up to 200% based on the size of the Entropic Rift when it collapses. This sounds fucking incredible. And for Shadow, your Void Blast now also causes your Entropic Rift to grow still. Collapsing Void increases Entropic Rift's damage by an additional 20%, and the damage of your next Void Torrent is increased by up to 200% based on the size of the Entropic Rift when it collapses. Also, the fact that Void Torrent has now a new talent that replaces it, assuming that that talent is also being buffed by this, is really cool. Rogue, we're looking at Deathstalker first. The 2-set bonus for Assassination makes Shiv increase the effectiveness of all Deathstalker damage effects and damage bonuses by 50% while active. And for Subtlety, Symbols of Death increases the effectiveness of all Deathstalker damaging effects and damage bonuses by 30% while active. So a little bit less of a buff for Subtlety than Assassination, I would imagine, because Subtlety just casts more Symbols of Death than Shiv's. Probably. 4-set piece makes Shiv have 2-second increased duration and consumes an application of your active Deathstalker mark when activated. While for Subtlety, Symbols of Death have a 2-second increased duration and consumes an application of your Deathstalker's mark when activated as well. Interesting interaction with the Deathstalker hero talent tree. Fatebound for Outlaw. The 2-set piece says as follows. Ghostly Strike deals 50% increased damage and has 4-second increased duration. Edge Case now flips an additional Fatebound coin, and activating Ghostly Strike triggers its effect. For Assassination, Kingsbane deals 10% increased damage and has 4-second increased duration. Edge Case now flips an additional Fatebound coin, and activating Kingsbane triggers its effect. The 4-set piece bonus for Fatebound makes having a lucky Fatebound coin reduce the cooldown of Adrenaline Rush by 30 seconds and Ghostly Strike by 15 seconds for Outlaw, and reduces the cooldown of Death's Mark by 30 seconds and Kingsbane by 15 seconds for Assassination respectively. The Trickster tier set 2-set piece makes Unseen Blade deal 30% increased damage and has a 30% chance to immediately refresh its cooldown. While the 4-set bonus, Coup de Grace, may now be activated a second time within 5 seconds, dealing 100% of normal damage. Assuming it still requires combo points to be casted, interesting how it will play in practice. Shaman, the 2-set piece for Farseer, makes Ancestral Swiftness summons an empowered ancestor for 15 seconds that deals 10% increased damage and healing. The 4-set piece for Restoration makes Ancestral Swiftness reduce the cast time of your spells by 25%, the mana cost of your spells by 25%, and increases the recharge rate of Lava Burst and Riptide by 50% for 8 seconds. Wow, this is actually turning Ancestral Swiftness into a legit cooldown. While for Elemental, it reduces the cast time of your spells by 25% still, the mana cost of your spells by 25% also, and increases the recharge rate of Lava Burst by 50% for a second, so essentially the exact same effect. We'll see if this remains the same when the server goes live. Stormbringer, the 2-set piece for enhancement. Ascendance has a 100% chance to grant a charge of Tempest, and every 3 Awakening Storms now activates Ascendance for 6 seconds. A little bit more of a deterministic proc for the Ascendance. Nice. Elemental. Ascendance has also a 100% chance to grant a charge of Tempest, and every 6 Awakening Storms now activates Ascendance for 6 seconds. So a little bit slower than for enhancement. The Stormbringer 4-set piece for Elemental makes nature damage increase by 3%, and Ascendance empowers your next 2 Tempests. Gather a storm above that deals 960% of spell power damage in nature to its primary target and reduce damage to nearby enemies after 1.5 seconds. Wow. And for enhancement, nature damage is increased by 5%, and Ascendance empowers your next 2 Tempests still to gather a storm above that deals less damage than for Elemental to its primary target and reduce the damage to nearby enemies after 1.5 seconds. Totemic 2-set piece. After you consume all of the Whirling Element modes, you cast Downpour at 200% effectiveness at your Surging Totem's location, for Resto of course. And for enhancement, after you consume all of the Whirling Elemental modes, your Surging Totem casts Primordial Storm at 200% effectiveness at its location. That's pretty cool. The 4-set piece makes that after casting Downpour, your next Chain Heal, Healing Wave, or Healing Surge casts again at 150% effectiveness for Resto, and for enhancement, after casting Primordial Storm, your next Lava Lash or Fire Nova casts again at 150% effectiveness, which might make you have the talent Fire Nova this time around. Very interesting. I remember using this in the last couple of years. Warlock, the 2-set piece for Diabolist, makes Chaos Bolt and Rain of Fire summon a Demonic Oculus, and it can summon up to 3. Consuming Demonic Art flings your Demonic Oculus at your target, exploding for quite a bit of spell power damage and for a little less damage to enemies within 10 yards without a particular cap. Interesting for destruction. For Demonology, Hand of Gul'dan casts at full power, summons a Demonic Oculus up to 3. So no one-shot shenanigans. Consuming Demonic Art flings your Demonic Oculi at your target, exploding for quite a bit of spell power damage to your main target and for a little bit less to the enemies within 10 yards. The Diabolist 4-set piece is the same for both, with Demonic Oculi analyze the battle while active and deliver information to you as they explode, increasing your intellect by 2% for 10 seconds. I'm curious to know if you swing multiple at once, if this actually ends up stacking. I would imagine so, otherwise it would be weird. You would be forced to play against your 2-set piece, or your 2-set piece would be forced to play against your 4-set piece. Hellcaller 2-set bonus. Mark of Xavius increases Blackened Soul damage by an additional 3% per stack. Malevolence increases the stack count of Wither by an additional 2 stacks for destruction. While for Affliction, Mark of Xavius increases Blackened Soul damage by an additional 6% per stack, so more, while Malevolence increases the stack count of Wither by an additional 2 stacks also. The Hellcaller 4-set piece makes it so casting Malevolence grants 2 stacks of Backdraft and prevents Blackened Soul from consuming stacks while dealing damage 15% faster for 8 seconds for destruction. While for Affliction, casting Malevolence grants 2 stacks of Tormented Crescendo and prevents Blackened Soul from consuming stacks while dealing damage 25% faster for 8 seconds, of course, for Affliction. And Soul Harvester, the 2-set piece, is the same for both. Shadow of Death unleashes your Demonic Soul to assault your current target for 12 seconds, dealing a little bit of spell power damage as Shadow, and a little bit less to enemies within 10 yards with each swipe. The 4-set piece makes Demonic Soul damage increase by 45% and Wicked Reaping damage increase by 45%. Your Demonic Soul generates 1 Soul Shard every 3 seconds while assaulting enemies. This seems very interesting because the Soul Shard generation is not the same for both specs, so I'm curious to see how this will actually play out. And lastly, Warrior. The 2-set piece for Colossus makes Demolish damage increase by 20% and critical strike damage of your abilities increase by up to 20% on targets affected by our Demolish for 10 seconds based on the number of stacks of Colossal Might consumed. This is for both specs. And the 4-set piece for Arms, Demolish increases the critical strike chance of your next 2 Mortal Strikes by 100%. Mortal Strike critical strikes increases your Rend and Deep Wounds damage by 100% for 8 seconds. Big Mortal Strike focus, big Bleed focus as well. While for Protection, Demolish increases the critical strike chance of your next 2 Shield Slams by 100%, and Shield Slam critical strikes increases your Rend and Deep Wounds damage by 100% for 8 seconds. This was going to be interesting to see how crit works as a stat for both of these, because it's normally a stat that you want to stack, but seeing as this is 100% crit, you might devalue crit as a stat in general and try to go for some other 2 gear. Mountain Thane, the 2-set piece, makes Thunder Blast have a 35% chance to call down 5 ionizing strikes on affected targets. Each strike deals a little bit of attack power and nature damage. And the 4-set piece, ionizing strikes deal 50% more damage and have 20% chance to grant a charge of Thunder Blast. Assuming that Thunder Blast can now stack, this is not mentioned, but we'll see if it ends up being the case by the end of the PTR testing cycle. And Slayer, the 2-set piece, is the same for both. Execute damage is increased by 20%, and executes from sudden death have a 10% chance per stack of Overwhelmed on the target to trigger a Slayer strike at 100% effectiveness, so a little bit of a passive damage, but we can always welcome more execute damage. And the 4-set piece, 4 arms, makes overpower damage increase by 20%, and overpower have a 2% chance per stack of Overwhelmed on the target to trigger Reap the Storm at 100% effectiveness. While for Fury, Raging Blow damage is increased by 20%, and Raging Blow has a 2% chance per stack of Overwhelmed on the target to trigger Reap the Storms at 100% effectiveness. So overall, a very similar effect. As you can see, they're all strictly related to hero talents. I would expect that most of these numbers will change by the time the server goes live, and that the effects will probably differ a little bit for each individual spec that they affect, since these specs are not usually equal when it comes to using these hero talents. And we will have all of these on the channel right here on Marcelian Online, so make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to get notified whenever we cover every single spec and class on this channel. And make sure to watch this video right here, where we actually talk with you guys in the comments and answer your direct questions and topics concerning World of Warcraft.